So welcome back, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. We are day 3 of our Asia Markets Forum. First of all, I'd like to extend a big thanks to Richard for spending time with us earlier and sharing his valuable knowledge about the Singapore marketplace. And so just a couple of quick facts before I introduce our next speaker. So when we ran the data, we found that Atlantic Canadian exports, so what we sent over to the ASEAN, Japanese, and South Korea markets actually soared to over almost $1.25 billion in 2019. And specifically with respect to Singapore, and maybe a testament to that growing marketplace, especially for Canadian companies, but Atlantic Canadian exports themselves grew a whopping 158% over the period 2015 to 2019. So something good, something very positive is happening in that country for Canadians and especially for Atlantic Canadian companies. And so with that, we are delighted to have again, Tractus Asia joining us all week, but specifically Uday Panikkar joining us today and live from Singapore. And Uday, I just want to send my sincerest thanks to you for coordinating the 5 different sessions this week, for agreeing to help us out, and for you and your team to have spent the time to develop some fabulous presentations. And of course, you're joining us live, so thanks for spending your evenings with us as well. So with that, a little bit about Uday. So Mr. Panikkar, you've been with Tractus as the Singapore country manager since March 2018, and was previously with the firm's India-based practice from 2011 to 2015. So you are speaking to Atlantic Canadians, and they do need to know that you have great affinity with Atlantic Canada. You are a graduate of Mount Allison, Mount A University, having received your commerce degree in 2007. And you also hold a Master in Law from the University of Nottingham in the UK. So thanks again for joining us today, Uday, and for your tremendous support to help us pull off this 5-day Asia Markets Forum. So Uday, we learned from Richard that Singapore appears to be a very open market, a very innovative market, and a market that is open to more, perhaps, global partnerships and quite possibly more goods and services from Canada. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And really interested to hear what you have to say to provide the goods, the practical advice that our SMEs need to know, need to hear if they really want to get into the Singapore market and start selling. So over to you. And just a reminder, folks, that the presentation, well, everything's getting recorded, but you can access the presentation, should be information below your screen to view that while Uday is presenting, but certainly everything is posted and will be shared with you after the fact so that you can retrieve the presentation and recording after the fact. So over to you, Uday, and thanks again.
Great, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Suzanne, and hello everybody. Great to be here. It's a pleasure to see how we can, impart some knowledge and insights from the Singapore market to Atlantic Canadian companies. Like Suzanne mentioned, I was there for a good 3.5 years. So the little town of Sackville was home for me for my undergrad. Definitely have a special place in my heart for New Brunswick and New Brunswickers. And so today I wanted to take everybody through somewhat of a more tactical approach on Singapore to kind of steer a little away from the conversation and the knowledge that Richard had basically explained about Singapore, which was a wonderful overview of literally everything. So that was a great presentation. And what we wanted to do was kind of delve a bit deeper into how we, as a consulting firm as well, help SMEs look at some of the practical aspects of the approach to the market. So I will just share my screen. Give me 1 minute. I hope you can see my screen. Perfect. So just a bit about Tractus and our firm. So we've been in Southeast Asia, China, India for about 25 years. We have our own people on the ground in about 11 offices all across Asia. And that's been our core focus for well over 2 decades. And we have a staff of about 50 people across all our offices. And we have a history of helping Canadian or North American, if I can say that, North American trade offices and trade departments and their SME clients move into the markets here, whether that is from a market assessment perspective, whether it's from finding the right kind of partners, or even set up feet on the ground here in this part of the world. And a lot of our work actually goes into helping educate SMEs on markets in Asia, what would be a good fit for them, what might not be a good fit for them, and basically take them through a more pragmatic, practical approach. So I know we've already been through this. Suzanne had given a nice brief intro on ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations of 10 markets, quite a large economic bloc. But one key thing to remember is that every single country here is very different, with different rules, different cultures, and different ways of doing business. I don't want to spend too much time on this, as Richard had also mentioned this, but it is one of the largest export markets for Canada, and this is actually backed up by the consumer spending that is going on in all these countries, where by last year they had crossed $2 trillion in terms of consumer spending. So a lot of potential. There are about 650 million people that live in this part of the world, so a sizable population and a sizable market to target. Now, I think the topic on everybody's mind, the pandemic. Singapore in general had managed it quite well. There was a bit of a blip in the middle where the cases were rising, but the government had come back and aggressively made sure that it was clamped down on and it was handled well. So Singapore is open for business. It is quite normal here, as if I can say that in today's world. But we are open for business, and being a trading hub, Singapore needs to be open for business, as that's its lifeblood. But compared to some of the other countries in Asia, which are still reeling under COVID's impact, Singapore has done a good job, and the fact that it is a smaller place, it makes it easier to administer. And one thing that the Singaporean government is always on track about is being aggressive with its campaigns, with its education of pandemic-related issues, and also ensuring that their supply chains are open so that other countries that are importing products to Singapore are aware of that and can do so easily. So what I want to start with is kind of placing Singapore relative to its neighbors in the region. Now, if you look at the chart, Singapore is a very mature, very developed market, though it's small, and that places it in a unique kind of position, as opposed to other major markets that we will explain more about later tomorrow and day after, which would be Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and then Thailand. So as I mentioned before, every market's very different and need to be approached differently. So Singapore, given how developed it is, needs to be something that SMEs need to think about, especially when it is to do with their product and whether it might be a fit for their product here in this part of the world. I think this was touched on. Singapore's a gateway and a trendsetter in the region. The economy is expected to bounce back by 4 to 6% after the pandemic issues from last year. So there is enthusiasm and some optimism around that. And Singapore had ratified the CPTPP back in 2018. along with Canada, Australia, and a few other countries. So that is one one cause for optimism and hope for Canadian SMEs looking to bring in their products here, and especially for Atlantic Canadian companies that are focused on seafood, or if it's wood and pulp and paper, and basically the top sectors that Atlantic Canada is well known for. Singapore is one of the top financial hubs in the world after London and New York, and over 7,000 global multinationals call this place home, which opens up opportunities for other businesses, and it is also one of the easiest places to do business. It's easy to enter, easy to exit, and easy to set up feet on the ground. But like it was mentioned before, it's an expensive place to do business. And I believe Singapore is one of the most expensive cities in the world. So that's a caveat, something to think about. However, it is a fantastic platform to launch yourself and your product into the nearby markets if you do well here. One thing that the neighbors look at is what Singapore is doing. Whether it's technology, whether it's logistics, whether it's tourism even. They keep an eye on what's happening in Singapore so that they can emulate that or bring those products to their market. So Singapore has that place on the pedestal. One thing important for Atlantic Canadian companies, especially in the seafood and the food, agri-food business, is that Singapore, given its really tiny landmass and limitations that come with it, makes it need to import 90% of its food requirements. So Singapore doesn't have any farmland. It needs to import literally everything that we eat here. And that is a tremendous opportunity for companies in that space and across that value chain. Going to seafood, as it's a trademark of Atlantic Canada, seafood is very popular here. Singapore also has a massive F&B industry, which is constantly growing. And I believe there are over 7,000 restaurants in this tiny country, which is testament to that fact. And on average, Singaporeans are eating out almost daily. It's part of the culture to go out and eat, which opens up opportunities for seafood companies, given that they consume about 22 kilos per person per year, which is maybe not as much as some of the other countries, bigger countries nearby, but for a country this size, that's it's quite high. Plus, the fact that Singapore has a very high level of disposable income and is one of the most affluent economies and markets makes it another driver for the agribusiness sector here. Another lesser known fact, but something relevant to some of the top mineral fuels related companies in Atlantic Canada is that Singapore is a big petrochemical and commodities trading hub. This might be a lesser known fact to people, but Singapore built a little island where it can refine mineral oils and mineral fuels and then re-export them to the nearby countries. So that particular value chain is something that the Singapore government has developed over the past few years, and is another area to keep an eye on for companies that are in that space. So as a research firm, we always like to look at data, and I know Suzanne had mentioned that Atlantic Canada's exports to this part of the world was over $1 billion, and that's fantastic to hear. We also wanted to check some of the top 3 Atlantic Canadian export sectors and how they were doing over the past couple of years. And from our data, it looks like ores was a specific sector that did pretty okay. Even though the numbers are small, there's definitely scope for improvement and expansion in that space. But also, with the pandemic hitting, most of the seafood and mineral fuels related imports into Singapore from Atlantic Canada, or from Canada in general, took a hit. But we expect this to bounce back next year, and we expect more opportunities for Atlantic Canadian companies in those segments, their top 3 segments. Now, looking at how to enter the Singaporean market, we as consultants, we like to think we're almost like a little bit like doctors. We need to diagnose when an SME is trying to come into a market and whether they actually are ready for it. So that's the first question you need to ask yourself. especially given the type of economy or the type of markets you will be facing in Southeast Asia. Singapore is extremely developed, like I had mentioned. So you need to see if there's a product market fit. Do you have enough information about the competition in Singapore? And does it make sense for you to go it alone, which you can easily do given how easy it is to do business here, but that comes with its own set of problems. Or would it be better for you to get a partner? And what are the specific opportunities in Singapore for your particular product, for your particular segment? So information is key. You need to assess whether Singapore is the right market for you in Southeast Asia, and then make a decision accordingly. So doing that market assessment, absolutely important, absolutely critical. It needs to be done objectively, and then you can understand whether Singapore is the right fit, or it could be another market. It could be Thailand, could be Indonesia. So that's something to keep in mind. Regulatory, from the regulatory perspective, Singapore is very transparent, also very strict. So you need to ensure that all your licenses and permits and accounts are in place before any of your products come in. And this is, of course, something that your partner should be able to assist you with in Singapore. But as an exporter, just make sure that your goods are being are okay for the Singapore market. They're not being controlled by the government or the customs, and then you're free to take advantage of this trading hub. Most of Singapore's the imports coming in are looked at by the Singapore Customs Act and the Singapore Customs, and there is a 7% goods and services tax on all imported goods. Now, with the CPTPP coming in, Canadian companies should be able to leverage its advantages and the fact that the tariffs are basically eliminated for several sectors. If you're looking to bring in seafood, you will be at the mercy, if I can say that, of the Singapore Food Agency, and they will be they could potentially test your product when it comes into Singapore or not. It is based on their discretion. And if you have specific seafood types, then testing might be mandatory. So it's a good idea to kind of understand what the regulatory requirements are beforehand. If you're looking at bringing in refined oil or crude oil and related products, then the Energy Market Authority of Singapore is the overseer of that specific segment. And for wood and wood-related products, it would be the Agri-Food and Veterinary Authority of Singapore, which is basically a subgroup of the Singapore Food Agency. And so that's, in a nutshell, it's basically, even though Singapore is very light when it comes to tariffs because of its position as a major trading hub, it's, the regulatory aspect is critical, it's crucial. And this brings me to my next point, because if you have a very good partner, they will be able to hold your hand through that entire process. And this is a traditional way to get into Singapore for many, many companies. And one of the main reasons for that is, despite it being a very easy place to do business, relationships still matter. Relationships are key. There are, cultural aspects to doing business in Singapore that you cannot brush aside, even though it's, like Richard had mentioned, it's a very straightforward place. But sometimes, you can face challenges such as, your potential partner or client not following through with their promises, or not having the right experience. If if you're dealing with a partner you haven't vetted. So vetting potential partners is key. Even though it's a very mature and developed market, you could face similar challenges in some of the other less developed markets as well. And so it's critical to vet your potential partners and understand what is important for you and what is important for them to do for you and represent the way that you want them to represent you in Singapore. So have a list of your critical factors listed out, and basically interview your potential partners. We have seen that previously in some of the other trade clients that we have helped, where someone has a partner, but they go incognito, they don't communicate regularly, and these are the practical parts of the business or issues or challenges that in the end impact your sales and exports. So absolutely transparent and easy place to do business, but it's a great idea to vet your partner. So that takes me to the next point, which is, how do you build your presence here? So, of course, partners are the traditional method. You identify them and you leverage on their relationships to build your business in the market first, have your products placed in retail shelves or at your end clients, depending on your product. And then, based on that success, you can then look at expanding here. Many companies, because of the ease of entering Singapore, try to go for direct sales, which is absolutely, which is totally okay to do. It'll be tougher because building relationships from scratch are, it's more challenging. But once you've got your, roster of clients, then you can really have a foothold in the market and make a decision on how you want to expand further. Depending on your appetite for risk, depending on how adventurous you are, you can also incubate here straight or set up, hire a local representative, and then start building your market. Of course, that is completely dependent on the amount of resources you're willing to expend here. So, as I had mentioned, first things first is making sure that you are selling a product in Singapore. People know your product, and the usual way to do that is through a good distributor, a trusted partner who they know their way around the regulations and the paperwork, and have good relations with end clients. Some cultural differences between Singapore and Canada. I always joke with my Canadian friends that just like how Canadians say "a" at the end of every sentence, Singaporeans have something similar. They say "a la" after every sentence. So a lot of commonalities, especially from a business perspective as well. Singaporeans like to make decisions quickly. They're very open-minded when it comes to doing business. They are very they're innovative. They've built wonderful ecosystems here for technology, for innovation, for education, and but there are also differences. We cannot. We have to look at the fact that Singapore has a lot of Asian influence from different parts of Asia as well. One of the main things that I like to explain to my clients is, Singapore, not everybody is going to be straightforward with you. There's a certain amount of uncertainty avoidance that happens, the concept of saving face. So if you're asking for, say, feedback and you're expecting someone to be very straightforward, that might not always happen. So there's something to keep in mind. Singaporeans in general are very long-term focused. So this takes me back to the concept of building a relationship, and you'll probably experience this with your potential partners here, or agents or representatives and clients as well. They're looking at long-term building a relationship, and that's going to be key for success here. So just a basic market entry checklist for SMEs. First question to ask yourself is, are you actually ready to export internationally? Not just in Singapore, but in general. Have you done your research on the Singapore market, and does it show actual realistic opportunities for yourself and your product? And do you meet the regulatory requirements to export? Do you need a local partner? Would that be the best way for you to go there, or would you prefer to go it alone? Have you vetted your partner? Another very critical part. And if you're already exporting into Singapore, then is it time for you to put boots on the ground, and how to go about it? A lot of what I have mentioned is completely dependent on where you are in that phase of your export life cycle, if I can call it that. So if you're not ready to export yet, maybe it's best to understand where the opportunities lie first. That would be doing a market assessment or doing a market research report about the market and the regions here. But if you're already doing business here, then what can be your next potential step? Are you happy with your current distributor? Or are your exports doing so well that maybe it's time for you to open up your entity, and hire someone here to kind of launch that further or strengthen it further. So it is dependent on where you are on that journey. Just some final pointers. Right now, given how uncertain the times are, it's a good time to look at Southeast Asia. It's a good time to look at Singapore, look at diversifying, but you will need to assess how the markets are, what the challenges you will face. You'll need to observe the way things are changing, because things are changing very rapidly. And finally, make sure that you're vetting everybody so that you don't face issues afterwards, because that can potentially get messy, and it's never fun. So always good to do your homework beforehand. So that's it for today. I hope that gave you some insights on ways to approach the market, some important critical items to think about.
Yes, thank you so much, Uday. We do have some questions, so hopefully you can stick around with us for a little while.
No problem.
And you've introduced the concept of culture, and then you introduced the concept of kind of journey to exporting. So I want to build on that. Starting with the culture, and we spent a lot of time with your colleagues and our other trade commissioner guests on Monday and Tuesday, talking about the importance of understanding who you possibly could be dealing with. And so, again, this is meant to be practical. So put yourself in the shoes of the Canadian entrepreneur, the Canadian sales executive who's going into a boardroom or is trying to make the pitch. And so what do we need to know about the Singaporean business person so that we don't have some missteps?
Sure. I think the first thing is understand who you're speaking with, because decisions are usually taken at the upper management level in Singapore. So if you're going to pitch, make sure you're pitching to decision makers. That's the first thing. So identify them, and if you can get the opportunity to pitch to them, that's the ideal thing. But on the other hand, Singapore, what I have seen working with both the government departments here as well as Singaporean companies, is that it's a very young market in terms of business leaders in positions of power and decision making. So things move fast, and if you're pitching to someone, say mid management level, that's not it's not a bad thing. You will still have decisions made quickly, and that's one of the pluses of doing business in Singapore. In general, companies make decisions very quickly.
So pitching to senior executives, and yesterday we learned that that's not going to happen. Pitching to mid-level or the decision-making influencer, if you will. So are we really going to get an audience with those senior decision makers?
That depends entirely on what is being offered in terms of product, in terms of uniqueness. Singapore is a very competitive market. So if your product is very similar to what's already there in the market, then that's going to be difficult. So one thing to think about as an Atlantic Canadian company is, what am I bringing to the table which is different? And that takes me back to my market assessment point. It's a good idea to do your homework. Otherwise, you're stepping into, you're flying blind, and you might get no as an answer from whoever you're pitching to.
And you did speak about the need to not only vet the market, assess the market, but also vet the partners. So practically speaking, what does that look like? And maybe you could illustrate by example of another North American SME who's made the journey.
Sure. So I'll break that down into two parts. So the first thing is what should you do? The first thing is, if you've identified a partner that you're speaking to, the first thing you need to sit down and think about is what's absolutely critical to you, right? Is it critical that they have a good sales team? Is it critical that they have a good knowledge and understanding of Singapore's regulatory environment? Is it critical for them to already have some experience selling similar products? Those are the kind of questions you need to ask and put down. And those are the discussions you should be having with your potential partner. And if they don't tick those boxes, then that's okay. You can, always look at other potential leads and other partners. So that's the first part. We had a great example from a Maryland, US-based company here that was having issues with their existing partner in Singapore. And it all, came down to how they didn't vet them properly. They lost, their partner promised things and then went incognito, didn't communicate on time. The company had sent over a shipment, didn't get paid, and they were unable to reach that particular partner. And those are the kind of teething problems you will face even in Singapore. And those are things you can try, at least on your part, through your vetting process to make sure that, they have a history of communicating properly with their clients, a history of making payments on time. Those are issues that you can face here. So those are issues that need to be addressed with the partner up front.
I guess the secret is always to find the trusted, reputable partner. And so how do we do that? Are there partners search? Are there sources of information? Are there people that can help us to make introductions or make connections to what could on the surface look like they could be the perfect partner?
Yeah, pardon me for my candor, but Tractus is a great source. That's,
Fair
it's we have a lot of experience with helping companies identify and scan the market for potential partners, followed by understanding the client or the SME's specific requirements, and then making sure that we undertake that vetting process and the shortlisting process of those potential partners, and then putting them in touch with the Canadian SME, for example. But the Trade Commissioner's Office, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Canada ASEAN Business Council, these are all wonderful companies and allies, if I can call them that, to help Canadian companies.
And in other Asian markets, we've learned that regulatory environments often flow into very strict contractual requirements. And so what's your practical advice for if we find the perfect partner, we vetted, perfect, and for engaging in some contractual arrangements? Are we signing deals for limited geographic representation, for whole of country, short term, long term? Give us some advice on that, if you will.
Sure. That entirely depends on how adventurous the company is. First of all, in terms of contracts and agreements, I would really suggest not having a verbal agreement. Everything should be in a contract. Everything should be written. And Singapore has a wonderful legal system. So, contracts are very important, and they're it's critical to doing business here. Verbal agreements always inevitably lead to issues. So definitely, having written contracts are key. Yeah, so that's one of the main points. Now, in terms of that regional kind of exclusivity, those are great aspects for the Canadian SME and the potential partner to discuss. If a partner doesn't have the capacity to take products from Singapore or have resources in other countries, in other markets, then that is something for the Canadian SME to look at. And that's a great critical factor, if I can say that, when you're vetting a partner. Do you want them to have their own offices or resources or presence in the nearby markets around Singapore? Or are you just looking at entering Singapore for now and seeing how you fare and then looking at the nearby market? So that is more of a strategic piece that the Canadian SME needs to think about and also discuss with their partner. Sometimes, companies are happy with just starting with one market, and there'll be Singaporean companies that are only present in Singapore, but you'll also find distributors or other agents who are based in Singapore, but they have their arms all across Southeast Asia. So completely dependent on the SME.
Understood. Let's expand on that, Uday, if you can. So the typical SME from North America looking to sell into Asia, Southeast Asia, targeting Singapore, perhaps as the end market, but also perhaps as the gateway, the hub, if you will, into
Correct.
the region. And so what are you finding? Again, it's typical. So with your typical SMEs that you're advising, that you're working with, what are you finding is the most common approach for the North American product and even service as well, right?
Sure. Sure. I think the traditional method has always been finding a good partner, finding a good distributor, and this actually even applies to tech firms. So, if you have a platform, so it's not tangible, you can still find the right kind of partners here who can help you expand your presence in the market. And if it's a tangible good, a tangible product, then definitely the partner model is the ideal way to go. Pre-COVID, Singapore, like I think Richard had mentioned, and we had all discussed, was Singapore is known for its events, and that was a fantastic way for companies to come in, meet people, forge those relationships, and take on that effort themselves without needing a partner, because in Singapore you can do that. But right now, I think with the fact that you can't really travel, you can't have a physical presence here. Our approach would be to suggest a partner.
Okay, so my good colleague Max from Nova Scotia asked us to expand on that again. And so what avenues would you recommend for this partner search?
Sure. Depending on what sector you're in, I think the first thing you need to do is scan Singapore for all kinds of potential partners or potential distributors that are in that space, that specialize in importing that particular product into Singapore. Right. And after that, it is a matter of reaching out to them, whether it's via phone calls or by email, and they're usually quite responsive in Singapore. So that is that's a plus, which might not be the case in other markets in Southeast Asia. So that would be the first step. Following that, having those first few conversations with that company would be critical, because that's when you'll really get to know what they can do for you, whether you're a fit for them as well, and whether they meet your critical criteria, that checklist that I talked about.
Yeah. And how is e-commerce affecting the traditional ways of entering the market via partners, importers, distributors that are on the ground? What are you seeing?
There are a lot of companies here that have that are helping international companies bring their products in here for specifically the e-commerce section. So you have the major e-commerce players who have their own logistics and warehousing capabilities and importing capabilities, and you also have smaller firms or independent firms, I think that's the right word to use, who work with them, who also help import different kinds of products for specifically to sell online in Singapore. So there is that ecosystem here.
That's great. Richard gave us a sneak idea of the upcoming Canadian e-commerce mission taking place in March. So I think that we should avail ourselves of that opportunity to learn more,
Absolutely.
and maybe even
Absolutely.
jump on board and start to make some of those connections. Um,
Correct. And you will probably meet a lot of some of those independent companies and importers that I was talking about
right.
at that mission. So that'd be a great way to start building some relationships in that space.
So, so e-commerce, so a lot of that is business to consumer.
Correct.
Are we seeing e-commerce as a channel for B2B?
I think there have been. It is there. It is something that is definitely um, growing here, but B2C is still the king over there. And last year we saw, with the pandemic, with the lockdown, Singapore saw I think all markets in Southeast Asia saw a significant boom in B2C e-commerce space. B2B definitely. The only issue with B2B is you know you need someone here on the ground who can really make sure that things are going smooth, especially from a regulatory standpoint. And unless it's a tech product, in which case it's all up in the cloud, so that makes it easier for the tech companies. But even then, the B2B from that standpoint, it is good to have a representative here, even if you're trying to sell online, because your end clients might need some post-sale services, and that's when you will they might find some challenges if you cannot service them that way.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. We talked a lot about after sales service, or servicing after the sale, if you will, with our colleagues from Korea. So just to kind of bring it all home, it's expensive to successfully enter a market. And you've told us, and Richard told us, Singapore is an expensive place to do business, notwithstanding the opportunities, and we don't want to shy away from that. However, again, generalizing,
Sure.
a North American SME looking to get into Singapore, maybe launching into other Southeast Asia markets, maybe not. What kind of cash do they need to get in, to promote themselves, to achieve some success? And what kind of time are we looking at for success to actually happen? Ballpark.
Great questions. I think that's three questions in one. So
Thank you,
I'll
Matt.
answer that way. Yeah, no worries. So I think first things first, it takes about a day for a company to get incorporated in Singapore, if you're looking at it that way. However, that doesn't include all the time you need to spend collecting all the documents and all of that. So when we're talking about practical stuff,
Yeah.
depending on what kind of entity you want to open up, if it's a private limited company, then if you have all your documents in place, that the accounting and corporate regulatory authority, that's the name of the organization that'll incorporate you, ACRA. If you have all that paperwork in place, then it'll take a day, maximum two. They need to vet your documents. In terms of the actual cash a company might need, incorporation doesn't cost a lot. It'll be in the hundreds of dollars, so it's not a lot. What will be your biggest expense would be hiring your representative, and depending on the level of experience of that representative, it could be anywhere between 3,000 to upwards of 6,000 Singapore dollars, or per month for the salaries. And of course, given that things are virtual, you can have them work from home, or you can incubate in a serviced office, which might cost you from anywhere from $600 to to over $2,000. So overall, just looking at that, those basic figures and basic pieces of information, we're looking at, say, $8,000 to start things off. Now, the final part of that, that's, by the way, that's per month, for looking at the salaries that you'll have to pay every month for that representative, and that's just looking at one person.
Right.
Of course, I haven't talked about permits or licenses that you might need. So that's something else that depends completely on your product and how much you might have to spend to get those passed by the government authorities. Your final question, which was how long it'll take for success. Very hard question to answer, to be honest. You have several companies that come in, set up like this, and it takes them anywhere from 6 months to a year to see something, something spring, get some traction in the market. Like we had mentioned before, it's a competitive market. There are top companies from all over the globe fighting for the Singapore, the Singaporeans' dollars. So you've got a lot of competition. A minimum of 6 months is a realistic thing to look at, and that's if you're starting afresh. Now, if you've already got some business going here, then that's always a good plus, and that might help reduce that time frame. It's important to show people here that you've done business here or your products are being used here, so that'll help cut that time frame for your your sales cycle. So testimonials, right? You have a Singaporean company already that's using your product. Tell the other Singaporean company that they're using it, and that should help you cut your sales cycle a bit. Yeah. But minimum of 6 months, depending on your product, but it could be anywhere from 6 months to 1 year, 1.5 years. So yes, that would be realistic.
And just comparing that with kind of benchmarking, if I may, pathway to success in foreign markets, typically 2 years, cost, business development, market development cost, a couple $100,000 Canadian, obviously. So just a comment there, are we in the same ballpark for an SME to achieve the success? And with all of the market development, business development, sales development, partner development work that's required, is it quite conceivable that in 2 years our SMEs are going to have to come up with a couple $100,000?
Yes, I mean that would be around the right kind of range for sure. And depending on how many people they want on the ground, that's going to be the main the main expense. So completely depends. If they see Singapore as a market with a lot of customers, then they might want to have a sizable sales team. But if they don't, then they can judge that a bit better themselves and have maybe a few people on the ground. So that's going to be the HR piece of that is going to be the main cost.
Thank you so much. So I do fear we've run out of time. We could have many more conversations, tap your brain, get much more advice out of you, no doubt. But again, thank you, Uday, very much for spending your evening with us and for all the work in the lead up and coordinating the effort on behalf of your Tractus Asia team. So ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude our presentations for day 3. We still have 2 more days of Asia market training sessions. Uday, you'll join us again on Friday, and we're going to have a conversation about some of those other Southeast Asian markets that we've mentioned. And folks, that's just going to be a quick 1 hour on Friday morning. But please do join us tomorrow and Friday for the remainders of our session. Remember that our sessions are all outlined on the event platform, and you can also connect with all of the speakers at your convenience. And Uday, will thank you in advance for engaging with our audience if they do choose to reach out with you directly. We're so happy that everybody has joined us today. Je vous souhaite une très bonne journée, and thank you, and have a wonderful day.